I just want to spend a few minutes on, I think, what is a political phenomenon that no one's really noticing, because I'm simply asking, can anything stop Boris Johnson? The MPs that elected him leader back in July 2019 after Theresa May's doomed administration, they backed him because he could win elections. But even they must be surprised that after the summer of discontent, after all the problems he's faced in the last 18 months, after the threat of Christmas being usurped, although I think slightly overrated, he's 10 points ahead in the polls, or he was in the last one that I saw. Can anything or anyone stop Boris? To help me navigate this phenomenon, very pleased to welcome Bill Bowkett, political commentator. Bill, hello.
Good evening, Nick.
Well, you probably heard my rather almost enthusiastic review of Boris Johnson, but the last Teflon Prime Minister I knew was, of course, Teflon Tony. But I think even he would have struggled, perhaps, after the HGV drivers and fuel, so forth, to be consistently ahead in the polls. It's extraordinary, isn't it?
It's absolutely remarkable. It seems that the Prime Minister hasn't been beaten up after coming back from his holiday in Marbella, what with, like you said, the HGV crisis, the supply crisis, the energy crisis, the culling crisis, and so on. And like you said in the latest YouGov poll, the Prime Minister has managed to stretch his lead over Labour to 10 points. And that's a similar picture where you look at other polls as well, in Salvation, Delta poll, and so on and so forth, Starmer, seemingly failing to make inroads, but also the Prime Minister has this remarkable stability. I mean, in the last 200 polls this year, the Tories have led 195, so they've only been behind on 5, and that could only be really, at the time, it was because of the controversial rise in national insurance, but that seems to have been almost forgotten by the electorate, and unless something really seismic happens, if it hasn't been seismic already the last 2 years, I can't see a way in which the Tories, or at least Boris Johnson, can fall back from this.
Well, I was talking to John Rentoul, chief political commentator of The Independent, who comes on this show very kindly most Saturdays. And he was basically saying to me, I don't know, again, normally I would believe this, but he said, well, we're going to get inflationary pressures. We're going to see the impact of the spending review, which is likely to cause some pain and certainly tightening of belts. He's going to say that we're going to see, I don't think the sort of unemployment figures have really sorted themselves out yet. I think they're a slightly confusing picture. And he feels that actually, no, there is a time coming when it's going to impact. What's your sense? I know you can't predict the future, and we're all foolish if we try and do that. But what is your sense of the difficulties coming up? How will he still just navigate them and float above them?
I think it's a fallacy to say that Boris Johnson, for one, is invincible and that he can maintain this support forever. I mean, you can see he's starting to have that vulnerability already. If you look at the most recent opinion poll from yesterday, his approval ratings have dropped to the lowest since the 2019, that remarkable 2019 general election. And I attended party conference reporting for Reaction and speaking to local councillors, MP. There's a real sense of distrust among Boris Johnson and his leadership. And like you said, he's got multiple challenges coming up, not only in the short term, but also in the long term. So in the recent issue, The Spectator, there was the big talk about inflation. And one source said that actually it could be as high as 6% by the end of the year. And the IFS have said that taxes may have to triple in order to pay for social care, the £2 trillion worth of debt. So, it could hit basically at any time because that's the nature of politics, and we've got a very difficult winter ahead.
But notwithstanding all of that, and I can't disagree with any of that, particularly about inflation, and I think when the taxes start hitting people in the pocket, how much does the leader of the opposition matter? Now, a lot of people say to me, well, he's only ahead because the opposition is so awful. Well, they're not great, but they're not that awful. And really, in reality, how much does it matter how effective the leader of the opposition is?
I think in a liberal democracy, opposition is crucial, and especially with with a Conservative majority of over 80, that needs to be the case, and they have to be held accountable for their actions, particularly during the coronavirus pandemic. But Starmer, while he's not way better, in my view, than Jeremy Corbyn was when he was leading, trying to appeal to the centre ground, he just hasn't been doing good enough. I mean, in July's Ipsos Mori poll, 6 out of 10 people said that he's doing a bad job at holding the government to account. So you've got to ask questions of the leadership, and it's crucial that that is the case, because Boris can't just have this free rein to have all these actions which may have existential damage in the long term, particularly when it comes to inflation, which, as you said, is going to hurt people's pockets, and it's going to be damaging and then to the Conservative Party in the long term. Even if they've got a plethora of talent, ultimately, when Boris Johnson decides that it's enough for his time in Downing Street, then the Tories will have to basically pick up the mess of his premiership.
Now, I've got an interesting tweet in here from someone who says people will soon wake up after voting for Boris Johnson and getting Caroline Lucas, which is obviously a dig at all the green emphasis that Boris is going on. And there's no opposition. That's what's keeping him in. But on the green point, on the agenda that Boris Johnson has switched to without an election, particularly in terms of taxes, he is behaving like a huge interventionist. Again, in old day politics, that would have mattered. Do you think he's actually, if you like, recognised the sea change in public opinion about taxes, spending, the need for intervention? I'm not convinced myself about the green argument, but according to polls, it's rising up the agenda. Do you think he's actually that politically astute? He's jumped on, if you like, a sea change without the need for an election to point it out to the politicians.
Well, on the issue of climate change and green policies, the public overwhelmingly, believe that climate change is a force and that it needs to be reckoned with. But many of the policies that might come in place might hurt the pockets of ordinary people, particularly if it had to come to replacing boilers. So there's going to be a lot of controversy surrounding any policies, and we should get a better picture of the direction that the government will be taking in COP26. But when it comes to Boris Johnson taking the opportunity that he's seeing with public opinion, ultimately, and this is very generalistic, but the public tends to lean left when it comes to fiscal and economic policies and right when it comes to social and cultural. And you see with the Conservative Party that it's much more seamless for them to lean left on economics, like, for instance, taxes, the rise of national insurance, corporation tax, and so on, and then more right on social and cultural issues when it comes to like crime or the culture war and so on. And like you said, we haven't really seen a politician do that since Tony Blair. And it seems that with the Labour Party, there's little manoeuvrability. It seems to kind of hit that mark, particularly within the electorate. And it's a massive struggle for Starmer, who comes across as this moderate, centrist, centre-ground candidate. But it's very clever. But the Conservatives have been doing it for many years. David Cameron was one of those politicians that was very easily could just lean more liberal on social issues when it came to like gay marriage, which was, difficult, as you say, as you probably know, among the Conservative grassroots. But when it came to the public, they overwhelmingly backed it.
I suppose my final question to you is, do you think any of these continuing rise in the polls might force him to find a very good reason to have an election? Perhaps so, but as we know with prime ministers calling snap elections, it could be very much damaging, even when they've got an overwhelming lead. I mean, I remember, as a school student, the very moment that Theresa May called that snap election, and there were some predictions that the Labour Party, that the Conservatives would have like an over 100-seat majority, but that didn't turn out to be the case. And as we know with polls a lot of the time, well, they're very accurate nowadays, and they've been much better, at least in the last few years, in garnering and capturing the image of the wider picture of public opinion. There are these hidden assumptions, and one of them, I think, is obviously the support of red wall voters, which Boris Johnson said was loaned, and we still don't know yet, how much that was motivated by Brexit or whether it's apathy with Labour and Jeremy Corbyn. And Boris needs to do enough to,
deliver on that mandate of levelling up. And
he needs time to do that.
And he needs that time. But the Tories have also been in power now for, over 11 years.
But they've magically, Bill, made it feel like that they haven't been. And I think that is an amazing secret that he's done. Well, look, we've well run over time, Bill, there, but thank you so much for that.